functionality to it in a permissionless way, or at least without permission of governance. Then on the other extreme, you have smart contract chains, where it has no specialized functionality, sort of specialized in being general, and anybody can come in and deploy smart contracts. So the idea behind the hybrid chain is to get the best of both worlds, where you have some specialized functionality, like, okay, this is a chain that's really good at certain DeFi applications, or it's great at interfacing with Bitcoin, to reference Interlay a bit, or some specific thing like that. But then adding this generalization alongside it, so that there's the possibility to add user-driven or user-written and user-deployed code alongside this core functionality. And this is important for a couple of reasons. Like we can use an urban planning or international trade metaphor, but you don't want the multi-chain ecosystem to be like the suburbs, where you have to like get in your car and drive to another chain in order to do something, right? Like we can build better products and experiment faster when more functionalities are vertically integrated, or experiments are vertically integrated. I think it helps with that quite a lot. So that's the like practical side of building better products. I think it also makes a lot of sense from a community side of things. It gives a way, if you're building a piece of specialized functionality in an app chain, to have a builder community grow alongside that can then spin out into its own app chains, like try new ideas. So this is like the core reasons for the hybrid chain thesis, to try to bring the best of both worlds together.
I'd love to get Alexei's perspective on how his thinking has evolved into this kind of hybrid chain idea, and if that's something which Interlay are looking at moving towards.
I mean, I guess I can drop some alpha. I mean, I think we've been dropping it all over Twitter. I mean, yes, we are already looking, not just looking, we're actually actively working on it. And for us, the kind of, it's actually like this decision of thinking around, okay, specialized chain versus hybrid chain actually started last September. And we were at a stage where like, okay, we built the bridge, and we saw a lot of people kind of, heading off to other apps, and then a lot of people that actually trusted Interlay from like coming with Bitcoin, they wanted something directly on Interlay. And then we had a lot of feedback that they want something directly on the platform because they really trust the brand. They don't want to have this 5 hops. They really just want to stay there one click. And we kind of had to decide, well, do we build smart contract support, or do we build a specialized kind of DeFi layer? And we did a lot of back and forth thinking. And in the end, it was pretty clear that we'd end up doing both at some point. The question is in which direction. And we first built like this specialized DeFi layer. And our decision there was, okay, AMM and lending, like the stuff that you already have on every chain, that we felt was good if it were like part of the core protocol, because it's very hard to find new teams that, like to raise capital to just like bring in a standardized AMM and lending protocol. You need something specialized. You need to really like, it's pretty well-known business model. So that fit very well into the Appchain thesis. But now as we kind of progress along kind of the roadmap, now is a really good time for us to start decentralizing even more, right? You don't want just one team building everything, right? The goal is always to, build an ecosystem and enable others to build on top. And over the past months, we started talking to a lot of new teams in the Bitcoin community. You probably see me be much more engaged also on the Bitcoin community side, because it's very, very important to, educate the community and people about the potential that, Substrate and like Rust smart contracts actually have, specifically in the context of Bitcoin, where all the new stuff, right? I mean, Lightning, Nostr, a lot of the like BRC20 tooling, I guess that's coming out. They're written in Rust, right? So it's a match, right? Between like Bitcoin and like Substrate, Rust smart contracts, Polkadot, that fits quite well. And so for us, it was kind of natural now transition to, okay, well, we've built this specialized bridge, we've built the DeFi layers. You now have all the basic tooling to now start kind of building on top of that. And on the Bitcoin side, if you look at the Bitcoin community, they actually don't really like, it's very different to communities, let's say in Ethereum and Solana and so on, because there are a lot of focuses on like DeFi tools and like composability and like really advanced DeFi stuff. And usually it's quite isolated. It's still quite like like cut off from the real world. Whereas Bitcoin, because Bitcoin doesn't change, you cannot do that much. A lot of the effort and resources go into adoption. How do we get people to use Lightning? How do we get people to use Nostr? How do we make it integrate with, like, you know, traditional businesses? And that's kind of why we, you know, position as like, okay, Bitcoin Bridge, best way to get Bitcoin into like a side system, right? That is much more much faster in terms of execution, programmable, and so on, and has its own DeFi layer, so you don't have to really think about adding these things, because that, like, not many people are very deep into DeFi that are building on Bitcoin today, right? They're kind of still, that was never the focus. So for us, kind of combining these two things is kind of a very very practical way of really just onboarding more builders, and, you know, combining this new stuff that happens on Polkadot, all the innovation that we're getting there, with the drive for adoption that Bitcoin has, and positioning ourselves right in the middle, right? So for us, it's kind of a perfect kind of setup to really grow and get more people involved.
Alexei, it's really interesting hearing you talk about the challenges and the opportunities of working in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And in that respect, you could almost consider Interlay like an outward-facing parachain, where you are part of the Polkadot ecosystem and sharing the security with the relay chain, but you're aiming to disrupt another market. And you can almost categorize parachains in one of two buckets, where you have some outward-facing parachains like Interlay or Robonomics trying to disrupt the IoT landscape, and then some inward-facing parachains that want to be composable with one another. Santi, is that kind of a fair characterization of the patterns that seem to be emerging with Appchains?
Yeah, I think that is quite fair. I mean, you said there Interlay going outside to Bitcoin. You have also what Vanguard is trying to do with layer 2s on Ethereum as well, that I'm really excited to see what Tom is going to talk about in a couple of hours here as well. But then you have like these inward solutions, like, for example, what Tansy presented a couple of minutes ago, right? Where they're like, okay, how do we get all these tools that Polkadot has into new builders to come and build new solutions into this ecosystem? And sort of like, a good idea there could be, how do we get more of this like inward-facing parachains, expose all these features that Polkadot has in an easier way for new builders, and external-facing parachains, if you wish, also like trying to bring all those users on the other ecosystems as well, right? So this combination of things sounds like quite interesting. And what I'm gonna say might not sound very nice, but XCM I think is great. But it's even better to talk about what you can do with XCM versus just talking about XCM, right? I mean, people will not get XCM per se, but if you tell them what you can actually build with it and you make it easier for them, then definitely a lot of things will come from it, right? And I think that this inward-facing parachains, and of course the outward-facing as well, but the inwards for sure, have a long way to go into like building these primitives into builders that, or exposing these primitives into builders and make them easier to use, basically.
Maybe just to add one sentence to that and to highlight why this is actually such a big selling point. So Interlay, right? I mean, there's standalone L1s that on Bitcoin, like, or L2s, like RSK stacks that have been around for Liquid, that have been like trying to solve that issue, but they've been isolated, alone. They have to build everything themselves. And what people like, when I tell them, oh, look, yeah, but, you know, we're part of Polkadot, and they're like, oh, what about, why are you doing Polkadot? I'm like, but look, we're doing the bridge, and when we launch, and we have this huge ecosystem behind us where we can collaborate, and there's not just Interlay building it, but there's this huge ecosystem that's constantly growing, which has the second most developers after Ethereum, and there's like native USDT and like all these cool things coming, and we're not alone. And I think that's when people start to realize, oh, and you can talk to all of them, and it's built in. Oh, that's cool. All right, fair enough. So it's really like, when you explain to people why this is so useful, then I think that's when it clicks. The term itself, XCM, you know, people don't really understand what it means, at least outside of our ecosystem, I think.
Yeah. Rob, we've spoken a little bit about kind of trying to maximize the ceiling on this hybrid chains, Appchains thesis, and the types of behaviors that we really want to encourage in the ecosystem for builders to, say, work together or kind of disrupt markets abroad. If you were to be able to kind of characterize the culture that we would like to see in the ecosystem, kind of amongst the entrepreneurs and founders of these projects, what kind of behaviors and kind of patterns of development are you interested to see in the next 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, I think the culture is really important, and it ties back to this concept called social capital, which is sort of a measure of the connections and network, not in the technical term, but in the actual network between people that exists. And like social capital is a very good predictor in societies of lots and lots and lots of different outcomes. So when we're building the network Polkadot, we're also building the network of people that work in Polkadot. So when I look at something like hybrid chains, and when I highlighted the component of building a builder community alongside the apps, this ties into the social capital portion of it. Like we want growth in the Polkadot network. So that like where growth comes from, I think is everything is constantly decaying, and then you have a few things that are growing really fast, and this displaces all of the decay. So what you actually need, and at least this is the conventional startup wisdom, is you have lots and lots and lots of projects trying different things, and most of them will fail, and some of them will be wildly successful. So we need to encourage this founder mentality where people are constantly thinking, oh, what can I try? What's an experiment I can do? Like, what, is there a moonshot here? Is there some like new thing that nobody has thought of doing before? Lower the barrier of entry for people to try to take those shots, and then see if they're successful, give them the space to try that, and then move on. So if we anchor that to hybrid chains, a lot of that is, if they are enabled by some other piece of functionality in an app chain to try something new, and then have a path to walk that, okay, they're writing a smart contract in WebAssembly, maybe in Ink. That's a new idea for a product or an application or service. Then that gains traction, and they can spin it out into a container chain, getting on-demand block space from Polkadot, and then walk all the way up that power law distribution to the point of where they are like a huge application that's is limited by the amount of block space that it can get. I think this is something like the story that we want to see occur. So in terms of the actual behaviors, this is a lot about mentorship in the ecosystem. Like don't just build products, build up the people around you constantly. If there are new people who are trying to get their feet wet in the ecosystem, to let them try out what they're doing, and enabling. If we lift as we climb, I think that's the key takeaway in the culture to actually getting an ecosystem that's self-sustaining. People mentoring people who mentor people, and so on, to get there.
And beyond the social capital, there's also like a pragmatic need for infrastructure to help. And things like the project we had before, Tenacity, is a really great example of that, where you can kind of iterate towards a sustainable business and a really compelling product in an easier way, where you don't necessarily need to jump from zero to parachain in one step.
Yeah, exactly. We want the I think the technical protocols to mirror the like social realities, so that we have ideas about how the world works, and we want the technical protocols to actually align with that as closely as possible.
I'm wary we're kind of running short on time here, but Santi, if there's more problems that you think these, let's say, inward-facing parachains should be focusing on in the next 12 to 18 months, are there any areas that you'd really like to see some attention on?
Yeah, specifically for that, I think that the ease of deployment that Tenacity or Tensi, depending how you want to say it, is trying to tackle, it definitely makes a lot of sense. I also think that now we are in a stage where this XCM composability can be also used a lot for new experiments. So opening those gates for people to try them out would be amazing. And when we go into this Appchain thesis or hybrid chain thesis that we were talking about before, that with these social constructs, you could also see even like people that have chains building smart contracts on other chains to just profit from something out there. And that also just generates a lot of like connection between them. Experimentation with how to actually like open your runtime towards these WASM smart contracts using something like app extensions or chain extensions, or something of the sort, I think would be very interesting to see as well. So how do we try these things out and see what's the right balance there? Could be interesting. Another notion that I do not have a lot to talk about, but that I've heard and I think makes sense is how much these chains that become hybrid or how they're actually going to manage their own block space as well, right? So how much are they going to like destiny towards like smart contracts and how much they're going to just put there for their own operations? I think we still didn't see that out there, but that could be interesting to explore too.
Definitely. I'll leave it open for a moment if anyone wants to react to that. Otherwise, it might be nice to jump to some questions from the community. If Funky wants to moderate, I think that's the way things have been going so far.
I can jump in and just, I will ask a question that was earlier presented in a different talk before you got here, like say, is there a possibility to use the Lightning Network with Interlay? Like, is that something that could be integrated in any kind of way with this hybrid chain thesis?
100%. So something that we're looking at and have been sneakily working on in the past couple of months is, like we've built this fully decentralized bridge, right? So in theory, each of the vaults can decide to spin up a Lightning node and, you know, on a optimistic basis, accept Lightning mints, right? And then that would work, right? So the question is whether there's demand for it. Where I see after having spent some more time in the Bitcoin community the past couple of weeks, like really like diving deeper into the issues, is then moving towards like threshold models where we kind of provide you with infrastructure to do like threshold setups where multiple participants, multiple vaults run together and they run kind of like a federation essentially, right? And that runs the Lightning node. And then essentially you replace things like, you know, Wallet of Satoshi and all these like custodial Lightning wallets that you have today where people use them because it's like that's usable, but then they're custodial, which defeats the purpose. You could kind of have like a middle ground where you can have the threshold kind of setup, run the Lightning node, interact with all these other hubs. But on top of that, now you can build cool stuff. So it's not just payments coming in and just sitting there, but you can actually have additional functionality. And I definitely think this could be super interesting and bring like payments essentially into this ecosystem.
Well, great. Thank you so much for the answer. And, you know, I just want to, do you guys have any closing comments? We didn't have any actually other questions in the audience chat. So any closing thoughts that you may have, or because you're all OGs, I would be remiss in not asking when Kingdom. So
Maybe, can I pose a question to Rob?
Sure. Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess it'd be super interesting. I see people love to hear is like, what do you think? What should we be building? Like, what's the next interesting kind of avenues? Maybe very high level, like for the Appchain thesis. What do you think is not yet explored enough?
Well, I think it's clear that we need to look bigger than a lot of the use cases that are out there, like DeFi and NFTs. I think they're cool, but in many ways they've been proven out. So we do need to look out larger than that. I think looking outwards into different markets is quite important. Bridges to other ecosystems, like Polkadot is very much an island right now, and doing bridging to those ecosystems is quite important. I'm also like particularly interested in you know, going deeper into the specialization that parachains can have, not just in the types of transactions that can be made in parachains, but also the like alternative networking stuff that they can do. I think that this is a very underexplored area of development in Appchains and Polkadot, or even in Appchains in general. Like Substrate makes it easy to write what we call a runtime, where you have some business logic and different types of transactions that are being done. But it's also a really good coordination layer for peer-to-peer networking protocols. And I think it's underutilized to lean into that property and go beyond on-chain games and on-chain property records and go into specializing in the peer-to-peer networking stack for stuff like messaging, for stuff like file storage, and get, you know, start leaning into some of those components of the Web3 vision or into ways that that's useful for other industries.